Hello and welcome to a special Digital Foundry Direct. Weekly? Maybe not. I don't know. This is a special. This is the Xbox special. It just showed last night, the whole showcase. Probably the best video game related show we've seen in many, many years, I would argue. So as a result, there's a lot to talk about, which is why we have a special episode of DF Direct Weekly dedicated just to the Xbox show. I even brought the flames back because the show was fire. So first of all, I'm joined by Alex Battaglia again.
Yeah, this show was top notch in a lot of ways. So much to talk about, John. Ridiculous amount to talk about.
And of course, given that Rich is still out and about, we've brought Oliver back.
Yes, that was one of the best presentations I've seen in quite a while, so gonna be fun to dive into that today.
Absolutely. So what we've done here for this episode is we've kind of broken down all the games we want to talk about between us, and then we've ordered them based on a combination of our own interest as well as like the general impressiveness and the impact that the individual games would have made, which is why the first choice, at least for us, was pretty easy. Let's get to it. So obviously the first thing that was shown off today was, well, the second thing technically, because they opened with a Black Ops 6 sort of teaser setting that up for later, but it was Doom: The Dark Ages, which is our first look at the new version of id Tech running. And it's sort of a new take on the Doom concept in that it is more of an open looking game. And it seems like they've sort of developed a lot of new concepts and ideas that we've not seen in Doom before, as if they've basically maxed out the nostalgia runway at this point, and they needed to come up with something new and different. And I think they've kind of done that here. There's the shield system, there's the painkiller-esque stake gun, and there's a lot of other things that we see in this trailer, not to mention the excellent tech and massive new levels, which actually does sort of feed into the game design, I think, somewhat, Alex, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think in this case here, we're looking at a game that is targeting a current-gen hardware only, with a lot more CPU space there. We saw in the like open plains environment that the trailer's like constantly snapping to like new areas when I think a weapon is changed or an ability is used, and they do like the really cool, the animation of the first-person model stays the same, but the environment changes thing. And there we see like in this one plains area, almost like roaming mobs, not like an MMO, but more, I would say, like a classic Doom level.
Right.
And in that case, because, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal tended to lock you down to battle arenas. They did it a variety of different ways. Like sometimes, like on the Foundry, they would only lock down the arena when you would punch a gore nest or whatever, and then they'd start spawning in enemies. But here, based upon the trailer at least, it looks like a much more freeform, larger level size. And I think you can get also a little bit of taste of that when it looks like the Slayer is flying around on some sort of dragon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, what was that?
I don't know. I'm curious to see what the level design is, because it did focus on this like large, castle-y, gothic looking like hellscape area with not too many, in Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal, you had the various missions. I'm not sure if this is a mission-based game based upon what we're seeing here. I don't know what the structure is, but it looks wider. That's for certain.
I'm wondering about that because they do show that part where the Doom Slayer sort of is in like some sort of a capsule and he's being handed his double barrel shotgun and his shield, and then he's blasting down from a ship, right? And I'm wondering, is that just like, that could just be an intro cinematic. It doesn't need to be the whole game structure. I didn't mind the mission structure of Doom Eternal, and it was a good way to explain why they were going to so many places, but it did feel a little bit, I don't know, it broke the flow just a bit in a way that wasn't the case in 2016. So I'm curious to see what they do with that. But yeah, you're right about not only is it much more open and there's roaming mobs, but the sheer number of enemies on screen at any point is massively ramped up, right, which is really cool. And also he's just kind of like blasting right through them with the shield in a way that's pretty neat, I would say. Yeah. In that normally in the other one, it felt like you needed to do a lot of glory kills all the time to sort of keep things up. And that's how you got your ammo and stuff. And in fact, did we see any of that? Is there any?
No.
I'm looking at
no glory kills
so.
necessarily.
No
glory kills.
No glory kills, but also no So that was the mechanic of Eternal, right? It's like you would kill enemies to get like ammo and other power-ups by doing
there are
glory
actually
kills.
no ammo pinatas, as I would call them in this in this trailer.
That's
a good term.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, which I think points at a very different design document at this point, because like they need, if you had all these like arenas, they can't just have like constantly respawning, like they had some way to get you forward moving in the combat. And here I'm curious if it is actually like ammo packs and health packs distributed around the level, but we don't see any of that, obviously.
Yeah.
Here.
It's hard to know if they would just like not really show that in the trailer or if it's genuinely a shift in the overall design. Mm-hmm. But either way, it's very promising. But then so is of course the engine tech.
Yeah.
Obviously, as an id Software game, I would say they're going to prioritize high frame rates over everything else. It's obviously going to be 60 FPS. Maybe there will be a 120 FPS mode as well. We'll see. One thing that we were debating on before recording here is whether the ray tracing features from Eternal have been retained here. And it's very difficult to say based on this trailer because there's not a lot of reflections visible.
Yeah.
But there's a couple points where effects are occluded by the player's hand, but you can still see them in the reflection, which makes me think that possibly it's still here. I don't know. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, like 107, you can see an effect, an enemy attack that's reflected despite the player's hand kind of occluding it partially. And then at 34 seconds, the super shotgun has a little bit of a reflection of the environment. Looks, fairly diffuse, but also, not really in screen space too much there. So I'm not sure if they're using RT reflections. It's possible, and they are throwing around like a lot of puddles as well, which is always conspicuous.
Yeah.
Like in sort of like how in Doom Eternal, when they updated that game for RT, they revised a lot of the surfaces to be more glossy, right? If you're just throwing in those glossy surfaces, it makes me think you're trying to show off something. So. But I mean, technically speaking, this is a really good looking effort. The materials, the overall quality of the lighting, it all looks really, really good. I think this game is going for a little bit less of a bright and colorful aesthetic than 2016, or rather than Doom Eternal did. Maybe a little closer to 2016, maybe even a little bit more realistic than that title. It's a lot of like desaturated colors and organic surfaces, not so much like artificial, and not too many metals as well. It's more, a little bit more grounded than that. So I think it's a really appealing looking game, judging from this trailer, and certainly the scope is the thing that does stand out as being like the most expanded here, but also just like the geometry and the quality of the lighting and everything like that. It's always been top notch in like id Tech, recent id Tech games, id Tech 6 games, and this looks like an evolution from that potentially.
Shout out to the skull munching personal rocket launcher or whatever that weapon
the
is.
The like flechette thing that spits out bits of skull. Yeah, it's fun.
Whatever that was an inspired design. Let me tell you, that does give me Painkiller vibes.
A lot of this, and like the nail gun that pins the guy to the wall,
gun or whatever.
Yeah,
exactly.
Totally Painkiller vibes. I actually got such big Painkiller vibes. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh,
dude,
man.
Yeah. There's a lot here, and the more I watch it, the more it's clear that this does seem to have been quite a shift from Eternal in terms of the potential gameplay loop that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So that's pretty awesome. I'm very, very, very excited to see what this is going to be. It's going to run great. It's going to look great, and it should play awesome.
Yeah.
Curiously, though, this was also revealed as coming to, even on the Xbox channel, it's coming to Xbox systems, Steam, and PS5. So they are not changing that approach, which I think makes sense, given that for a lot of the Bethesda stuff especially, I think it makes sense to sort of keep that sort of multi-platform approach, because that's definitely, these types of single-player focused games definitely benefit from being on as many platforms as possible in terms of getting eyes on the game and sales. It does say it's coming to Game Pass as well, though, so that's kind of the big benefit I guess Microsoft gets out of owning Bethesda, is essentially to bring the games to Game Pass on day one. So
right.
I think that makes sense.
I'd also hope possibly for a Switch 2 version at some point, because the panic button Doom games on Switch were always very impressive. And Doom 2016 in particular on Switch, I think I have like 170 hours played on my Switch. For Doom 2016, I just played a lot of that game. So for sure, this is a title that would be good on the go. I think it could be, at least.
Or what if there's a Switch 1 port?
Yeah, maybe that's less appealing.
I don't think so. That would not be great.
Yeah.
No, I think it's pretty much... if we had to make a wager right now, I would say it's absolutely going to come to the next Switch. Obviously, they can't announce that yet. But, depending on when that comes out, like, what if... like, conceivably, this could either be like a launch title or, something that comes not that far after launch, right? Like, it's not announced, but I could see that happening. that would be pretty slick.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was easily, I think, one of my favorite games shown today. It was a great way to open the show. I was very excited for that. But then, so going down our list, let's talk about the next game. A bit further into the presentation, they cut to some sort of FMV CGI footage of something that was like, wait a minute, is this going to be Perfect Dark? Is this going to be Perfect Dark? I was like, they can't just show another CG teaser, seriously. But then they didn't. They actually finally, for the first time, showed proper gameplay. And wow, I mean, it's hard to know how far along they are. Like when is this actually going to ship? Like, because this was very vertical slicey, right? But at least we've seen the idea of what they want to do with their game. And they seem to be making sort of an immersive semi-light type of game, maybe, where I guess people might look at it more as almost Hitman-esque design these days, in a way, where Joanna Dark is tasked with infiltrating some sort of compound. And in fact, most of the trailer plays out without any sort of shooting at all, right? She's using gadgets, she's sneaking around. So it's very stealth-driven kind of experience. You almost think like maybe the Arcane studio would have been pretty good for this. Just saying. But all that stuff looks good. There's also a lot of parkour, which is really cool. Very Mirror's Edge-like, right? Running, lots of first-person camera animations, sliding under things, wall running, grabbing pipes, climbing the pipes. All that stuff is here. So that looks fun. And then they do show some firearms action in there as well. It is just a slice, but it's extremely promising slice, and I think it's a really smart direction for this type of series, is to really turn it into something a bit like this. But I guess from the DF perspective, there is the technology side of things, and as we know, they are working with Crystal Dynamics. So, Alex, do you think that what we are seeing here is the latest iteration of Crystal Dynamics' in-house engine?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think this is Unreal Engine 5, actually.
Oh,
and
is it confirmed, or is it just like a...
Yeah. So I think this is UE5. I think also Crystal Dynamics a couple of years ago mentioned they're switching over to UE5 and they're dropping their in-house tech. I think that was what they said. So it would have, what was that?
Dude.
That would have been... What is the name of their internal tech?
I can't remember, but that's...
Is it Dawn? It Dawn?
You're breaking my heart in real time, Alex.
Oh.
I'm really sad because I liked their tech. It was great,
I mean,
right?
it was awesome. I mean, I'm always a fan of custom tech, and they were pushing things, any of the stuff related to IDOS was always kind of pushing in some really cool direction. And here, though, there's a number of scenes. For example, there's like a back alleyway scene after Joanna uses the voice print to get into a restricted area, and it's completely indirectly lit area minus some local lights. And there you can really see what I think is Lumen in action, giving skylighting with shadows. And I think that's all throughout the trailer. There's also a moment when a door is barged down, maybe I'm a little bit mistaken about the door being barged down.
Yeah.
But there's a hallway indoors, and there's sunlight coming in from the left-hand side, hitting a tiny patch of the right-hand side wall. And if you look at the left wall, there's fizzle of GI noise, of like RTGI noise, but also you can see that some of that RTGI, based upon maybe it being a concave shape, is only in screen space, because Lumen has that issue. Like when the camera turns, you can see it disappear, some of that lighting. So I think we're looking at a UE5 title, and I I'm always a little bit nervous about Unreal. I like
Yeah.
the visuals, but you know, like here, I think I wasn't really like. Sometimes I get games that look very UE5 like. We talked about this just before we started. Here, I wasn't getting the look like this is a UE5 tech demo. I think the tech was servicing the game's design goals here based upon what we saw from what is presumably snapshots of a vertical slice. Yep. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it certainly felt a little vertical slicey to me, just like the way that it's kind of cut together, the way that it seems like archetypical gameplay, like this is how the player is going to experience the game, you know, that kind of stuff. So I did think that, and for sure it's pretty obviously UE5. I also spotted that bit of lumen noise in the hallway, and the shadows are like virtually perfect in that classic like VSM way, and even like there's like a bit at the end with a grass on screen, like this really nice looking very fine grass where all the individual blades are perfectly shadowed, and you're really not gonna get that else with too much other technology. And then also like when the door opens, actually when an enemy is coming through it, you see the light spill into the room and accumulate over multiple frames, and it all looks very good. The only thing I would say is that in some areas, like indirectly lit areas, you do get a bit of that kind of characteristic lumen, maybe software lumen over darkening that I've tended to notice in a few titles.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, it does look a little pronounced, maybe a little bit too pronounced in some areas. I would rather have some more obvious occlusion than no occlusion, to be clear, because I think it, you know, give me a dynamic image over a really flat one, but I think probably it should be a little bit in the middle there. But yeah, I think it looks really appealing so far. I think it looks good. My only concern would be performance. They're showing this off at 60. I presume this is like PC caliber footage. I'd be interested to see what this looks like on the consoles, how it's running there. Obviously, this game is probably a bit out. Actually, they don't even specify a release window, which I think this is the only game not specify a release window. So I'm thinking probably 26 if I had to guess. And
oh wow!
Yeah. If the game also had a little bit of some documented or rumored development issues, this seems on the right track, but maybe it's just a little bit behind where it might have otherwise been.
Get there.
Yeah.
I think it was announced in 2018 originally.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that weird UE based. I think it was an Unreal Engine based trailer that showed off the fact that it takes place. This takes place in Cairo. This initial mission, I believe. It looks like Cairo. I think that initial trailer did show that off. There's like pyramids in it at one point.
There's something about the lighting here that keeps reminding me of the original Battlefield 3 trailer. You know, because it's set in sort of a deserty environment. When they have the light pouring into the room, it's at that really strong, bright bluish white kind of glare, and then you know the sandy surfaces everywhere. It's interesting.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm like, just to talk about design, because tech wise, I think we have a good look at it. Design wise, I'm very excited for this because there's always a question like, how do you bring this older franchise back to the modern era? I don't think a lot of people are very interested in I am the original like Perfect Dark or even Perfect Dark Zero to a certain degree. Like I don't think a lot of people are interested in that. Like you have a gun on the screen and there's a handful of gadgets, but the missions are, at least in the first Perfect Dark, you know, a little bit unstructured. But if you go back in time, that's kind of simple gunplay. You just stop, you aim, you shoot someone in the foot, like hand, whatever, the gun pops off. And it was interesting. And the levels are kind of small, contained areas where you have a little bit of freedom of choice. I don't think that works for a lot of modern audience. And I think them bringing it more in this immersive sim stealth, and maybe even with a mix of parkour to get around the environment better, definitely jives more with modern sensibilities. And I think it's a great way to take an IP which otherwise may not have a lot of interest in it, because a lot of the people that played this game don't play games anymore. Maybe, you know, like how do you excite people about a really dormant IP? And I think not a lot of people are making immersive sim style games. There's one Mirror's Edge game that everyone really knows. A lot of people didn't play the sequel.
I liked it.
You know, so I think this is a great way to reintroduce the world to whatever Perfect Dark can and should be, and keeping it spy-like. And I'm very excited for it as a result of this. This trailer was probably my highlight of the show, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Definitely a top one. But gosh, beyond the Crystal Dynamics situation, but then also I was just thinking we've also lost the Dawn engine, I believe, which was the Eidos Montreal.
The Eidos one, yeah.
Which I feel like the visuals here look like what I would envision an evolution of the Dawn engine to look like somehow.
Yeah, Dawn and Deus Ex Mankind Divided was really good looking. So still, if you load it up now, it's very, very good looking.
This did remind me a little bit of Mankind Divided. I'm not sure if they'll do the same kind of like central city kind of concept that you had in that title, but that would be interesting if they're like setting it. Yeah, hard to say based on this for sure, but that'd be interesting.
Actually, that would be quite a change, but that could be really interesting. I'd like to see that. Yeah, we'll see what they do though. I really hope this turns out because it's extremely promising. So good on them for finally showing it. Next up on our list, we have the return of Gears of War, known as E-Day. Are you guys ready for E-Day? Now, so obviously this is a thing because we've been waiting to see this new, what the Coalition has been working on. What they've done here, however, is essentially, this is sort of like a mood setting piece designed to reveal what this game is about. It is, a cinematic created by Blur Studios, but apparently it is all using assets and everything that they've generated for use in the game. One of the Coalition members actually corrected Jeff Keighley's post on this about what it actually was. So it's pre-rendered, but we can't really judge what they're doing just yet, but it does give us an idea of the type of visuals they're going for, right?
Yeah, I think it is a UE5 pre-rendered cinematic.
Yeah.
Like Blur worked within UE5 and exported it.
I think that's probably exactly right. And by the way, Unreal Engine 5 has really nice like video editing tools within. I will say the timeline setup and setting up your shots, really great stuff. That's cool. And you can just export it out as a video. But obviously, I guess the big thing to take away from this is that they've done probably a pretty smart thing and have essentially rebooted it. So at the end of it starts with this attack with one of the locusts like coming in and going after who you can see from the dog tag is Marcus Phoenix. And then at the end there, the building sort of crumbles down and it reveals what looks like a more normal cityscape to us, at least, under siege. Right. And then Dom comes in, saves Marcus, and it's like, oh, this is like a prequel kind of thing. This is when they first got together, and this is the city like going down. So it is Emergence Day. What was your thoughts on this, Oliver?
Well, I think it's very interesting. It's another Gears of War prequel because in part Judgment was a prequel. It also had some stuff set in and around E-Day, Emergence Day. I think it's interesting because 5, not to spoil anything, but at the end of 5 they do kind of set up a sequel. It's interesting they didn't pursue that further, but I kind of feel like the Gears story going from especially 4 and 5 kind of are a piece together. I think it's basically sorted. I think that going back to the original game, going actually 14 years before the original game, for sure is an interesting change of setting, and I think it could make for a really interesting game. But on the tech front, there are a couple things. This is mostly irrelevant because we know that the provenance of this trailer is not necessarily what the final game will look like. But yeah, it's the hardware RT, the reflections are quite nice, and the environment's quite dark. The models look excellent, of course, and presumably those
super
will
detailed.
Be reflected in the final game as well. But there is actually one interesting hardware detail that did come out of their communications on the Microsoft blog, I think, which is that the game will feature hardware ray-traced lighting, reflections, and shadows, next-generation destruction and gore, and cutting-edge animation technology. So that would presumably imply hardware lumen use in the actual game itself, and possibly ray-traced shadows as well, but it's not clear to me whether they're referring to ray trace shadows, like real ray trace shadows, or just the shadow map ray tracing that's done using the VSMs. It's not. Totally
I think it's gonna be VSM. If I had to wager, I believe it's gonna be VSM.
Yeah, so they're promising those things at least, which is interesting, especially if they do target higher frame rates in the console. Again, we don't know, but that would be really quite something, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I wonder if they could, though. If you recall, the Matrix Awakens. That's what it's called. Matrix Awakens demo did use hardware RT for shadows in the cinematics when they did close-ups. When we interviewed them, they mentioned that, and even on console.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they could get area light shadows, for example, from like fill lights for cinematics, and it definitely worked out there very well, I would say. So it's technically possible on console even, and I'm just curious then. This trailer, obviously, we know it's 30 FPS. We know it's Providence at this point. Thank you, right, Oliver? Very good to point that out. But I'm curious if they're going to do what they did in Gears 4 and 5, where they have 30 FPS cinematics and then 60 FPS gameplay. I think that's the way they split it.
Yep.
And I think that would be really reasonable for this game. One thing beyond that, though, that I was really excited about is that on the blog, they mentioned that they were trying to go back to not go back, but the horror element seems to be a bit ratcheted up based upon the blog entry. And one aspect and the trailer for sure, that Gears of War 1 has, not always, but sometimes, is actually like, oh, these are like awful monsters, and it's pretty dark, and you can't see them that often. And I think that's something that you definitely lose going into 2 and especially 3, and definitely in 4, where you have like robots that are kind of silly. So I think them going back into that, and if they did actually, they could then have levels that are a little bit slower paced and less about cover shooting and more about like, a different style of combat. I'm curious if that is what this could be hinting at, actually, but it's just a cinematic trailer.
Although thinking of cinematic trailer, there's that part about 1:07 where he's wrestling with the Locust and the knife is right up against Marcus's face, and they sort of simulate the light bouncing off the knife and reflecting back onto him. And I'm like, is this just a flourish that they're able to engage in the trailer? Or is this actually will we see this sort of fidelity in the actual real-time cinematics? Would be really interesting.
I mean, with path tracing, you could do a lot of things.
With path tracing, you absolutely could. But yeah, I'm wondering. But then again, those types of things can always be simulated on a bespoke case-by-case basis, right?
Fake,
like it doesn't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just throw a projection text on his face for like
need
5
to be
seconds.
anything.
It just looks fine.
But yeah, I'm loving the dark tone that they went back to, because I feel like that is something that kind of went missing. And like I remember Gears 1, that time when you arrive in the second level, and I think we talked about this in the last direct, in the questions, where the krill fill the sky and everything just becomes this like it really takes on this horror vibe. And then you work your way through that, and eventually you're making your way to that factory at night in the rain, and just everything feels really
or like the bit around the gas station.
Yeah. All of that stuff. Like the original Gears has a really great vibe, and I like the newer stuff as well, but it definitely lost that horror element, and it became a very different sort of vibe. So I think going back to that at this point makes more sense than continuing the 5 train. Because I don't think, I like Gears 5 a lot, but I don't think it was as well received overall compared to prior entries. So, very curious to see what they do with this. And this is a promising first look. I wish we would have seen some gameplay, but it makes you think this is still a ways off. As we know, as has been reported, they were working on there was rumors of a different IP or something at some point that they may have been working on, right? And then that was shelved, and then they decided to do Gears. So there could also be some, this is taking additional time just due to that as well, potentially. But I'm happy that they're back. I can't wait to see it. So yeah, next on the list of interesting trailers, Konami finally showed off gameplay of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. And the initial trailer that they showed was basically just nature footage, showing some of areas from the early in the game, but no characters. And it did look a little odd in some ways. But seeing this gameplay footage here, I'm fascinated by it because it looks good, I would say. I'm very happy with what they're doing here visually. It also looks surprisingly like they've essentially just taken the core animation framework and design of the original game and brought it into this new technology base, right? Like the animation, the rigging, all of that stuff seems very similar to the original. You can see it both in the cutscenes and the gameplay, which is not a bad thing. It's just, it's interesting to see it when applied to these extremely high detailed models, right? So like there's the part where he like runs, you can really see it with the the CQC when he runs in there and just does all that kind of stuff. It feels very much like that.
There's actually one shot that I thought was interesting where Snake kind of rolls into the prone position, and he doesn't hit the ground with any sort of velocity. He kind of just hits a perfect prone and is flat as a board, straight
then
as a
stops.
board.
Yeah.
And then it kind of feels like the game's presentation on PS2 is being preserved here, and there is probably a certain responsiveness to that, I would have to think, in terms of the animation, perhaps. But it does feel like out of step with the rest of the game. Like, it does feel totally like you're looking at kind of PS2 animation frameworks, but everything else is very modern looking,
These games has a very precise feeling to them in the animation, but that also makes it look a little less natural. And it's just kind of the way it worked at the time. And I thought it worked well, but it does have a strange sort of appearance when you see that mapped onto these high-end visuals. So I'm very curious to see how that actually plays out.
Definitely want to call out UE5 here.
Yeah, definitely.
Really obvious in a lot of areas. The character getting out, I recall, jumping out of the back with the gas mask on, jumping out of the back of the airplane. You can see like the reflections in their... in the glass of the goggles.
The visor.
The visor, thank you. And another thing that I really think is interesting is that in games of this era, like it's like Far Cry 2, like initial areas where like there's these like paths, and they're all like structured by there being like kind of really steep hills next to where the path is, and it's like maintained, like that's another like visual thing, like the animation where it's like very snappy, and I don't want to say lacking momentum, but it's definitely designed around gameplay first versus just visual flair. And that is another thing where it's gameplay first, where like, no, we're locking you into this area, even though it doesn't make any sense that there's like 30-meter hills that are extremely sloped right next to like jungle terrain. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, but they're keeping that too. I'm curious to see what it's like in person. I think there's been a lot of negativity about this. People don't like Konami. I also probably don't like Konami on some level, but we don't see this game play that often these days. Stealth action,
right? Not like this.
Not like this. So especially with like the weird systems interactions that these games can have. So I'm excited for that, just to play that all again for sure.
And yeah, that's a really good point about the walls and such. And I think I'm actually glad that they kept that, because that is the level design. And that's specifically what makes the levels work. But there are certainly larger open areas. Like as you're funneled through those spots, you end up in areas where there's like a huge camp with like all these buildings that you can both enter every building, you can crawl under every building, and all of that was done in the original game. And that opens up. So Metal Gear Solid subscribes to what I always call the wide linear style of gameplay, where it is just ultimately a straight line that you're following, but along the way it opens up and there's wide areas within that you can then tackle, and figuring out how to play through them and sort of playing with them almost like a toy is a part of the appeal, I would say. And that's something that Metal Gear is usually excelled in. So I'm happy that they've kept that sort of design focus. It really, really, really seems to hold true to it, and more than I expected them to, actually. In a way, it's almost like it reminds me a bit of a Blue Point style production, though perhaps even more slavish to the original. If you look at like Demon's Souls PS5 or Shadow of the Colossus, they made changes to things like animation in a way. Like things looked more fluid overall in a different way compared to this. This feels very much like it's staying true to the original game. One thing I did notice, though, is that there's this inconsistent use of motion blur, in that some scenes have nice per pixel motion blur, but then you have scenes like there's a late game scene where you're riding in the sidecar and you're firing a rocket launcher at guys driving through this valley, and for whatever reason there's no motion blur there, and it would really benefit from it, I think.
I think one thing that does look good, though, and kind of reminds me of the MGS3 pachinko machine, I think you might remember that. Was that a
Yes.
Pachinko
Yeah, of
machine?
course.
It was a Pachi slot machine. Yeah.
Pachi slot. Okay, yeah. Is the cutscenes actually look quite good? I think in this, I love the way, especially they've redone those kind of like intro cinematics to MGS3. It just looks very iconic, and I got that same feeling of like, oh, this is a stealth mission in the jungle, and it's very cool and all that stuff. And I think they've done a really good job in terms of replicating all the right notes, but done in UE5, done pretty well. One thing though is that facial animation is not 100% there. Now, relative to the PS2, I'm sure it's more involved, but relative to other big budget titles of a similar fidelity, to me it looked a little bit off. Now, there isn't too much of it here, so maybe that's just a presumption on my part, but it doesn't look quite perfect in this showing. So maybe that's evidence of, again, the animation frameworks, they're not keeping up with the rest of the presentation.
It actually looked very similar to the original in that regard as well. I would say, like, and all the cutscene animation and the camera work, everything was like a 1-to-1 copy of the original game, from what I could tell. Like, I've played that intro so many times, just seeing those angles again in every shot, you're like, that's exactly the original game, shot for shot.
Right.
One thing that's interesting, though, is that obviously this will be a normal third-person camera system, right? And that's what most people that have played MGS3 now would know it for. But recently I loaded up the original version that came out, and I kind of lament the loss of, or the defocusing on the fixed camera stuff. I believe it was optional in Subsistence as well, though. You could actually like toggle between
The
them.
original.
But are you familiar with the original version, guys? Where it's like rather than using a third-person camera, it's more like Metal Gear Solid 2, where every scene has like a tracked camera that follows Snake, but it allows some really cool angles, and it really makes the game look like exceptionally good. And I actually think it lost some of the visual flair when you switch to a normal third-person right-stick camera. Because those camera angles were very carefully chosen to look a certain way, and they were good at that. It was just the industry was kind of shifting at the time, and I can see why they would have switched, but still, I would love to see them, since they're staying so close to the original anyway, it would be nice if they kept that toggle option where you could essentially bring in the fixed camera angles.
Oh, actually, they do. They do.
Wait, they have that as an option?
They do, yeah, they do. It's quite
no
exciting.
way.
Yeah.
Dude.
So they really are going back in time.
That's
here.
incredible. All right. That actually further increases my hype then for this. That's fantastic. Yeah. So this really is just a 1-to-1 copy of Metal Gear Solid 3, but with fancy visuals. Fascinating.
Really?
Looks like it. I mean, I
really
can't see any major changes. Maybe there'll be some tweaks, but this does seem like basically 1-to-1 with what Kojima shipped way back 20 years ago.
All right. The fact that they can do that shows how ahead of its time it was, I would say. My gosh, that game. I wonder if they'll keep the Guy Savage stuff, though. I'm going to guess not. Are you familiar with that?
No, what is that, John?
So that's that part, and I was lucky enough to encounter this the first time I played MGS3, because you won't always see it on your playthrough, but essentially the point where you get captured and thrown in prison, if you save your game, quit out of the game, and then reload your save. So like the first time I just saved my game and quit right there, and then I loaded it up the next time, and you load it up, and suddenly you're playing this 60 FPS weird dreamy looking brawler thing where you're like slicing through dudes with like gore everywhere. And I remember at the time looking at my CRT and I saw it switch to field rendering mode. Like you can tell that the PS2 changed resolution. You're like, wait, what? And then it's this other game. And then you're just like running through this nightmare, slicing dudes to bits. It's extremely bloody. And then Snake, or Big Boss, like snaps awake. And you're like, what happened? Right? So it's just like this weird little dream sequence. But as it turns out, it was actually a completely different engine. And it was some sort of like a prototype thing that had been in development.
That's funny.
And they stuck it in there. But from what I remember, that did not appear in the HD re-releases of the game, which kind of makes sense given that it's a completely different engine. It literally loaded like a different EXE, and then the whole system was just, which is...
Oh, that's crazy.
It's cool. It was amazing that they did that. But, and so... since they're staying very close to that original, I actually do wonder, would they go through the effort of implementing that here? like
I would imagine actually almost so,
awesome.
given how like you were just describing the slavish adherence to the original design, including the camera system, which I'm surprised about. You know, Capcom, when they remake these games, they take a lot of creative liberty with them. There's obviously the design has a lot of the same structure, but it's like RE2 is completely different in a lot of ways.
Different game,
yeah, and even Resident Evil 3 is way different. Here,
Extremely.
I would love to see that, and it wouldn't be the first time we've seen that in a modern game. I was just thinking about the Wolfenstein games. They do the exact same sleeping, different gameplay thing.
You're right.
If you recall that, that was funny.
Yeah.
You can play the original Wolf.
I remember that. You walk. It's like you sleep in the home base there, and he's like muttering to himself about like the dream that he had.
Yeah. Like I could see like health power ups and treasure blinking.
Oh man, I love that kind of stuff. I'm such a sucker for that.
That game's great.
That's fantastic. But we should move on to the next game. Next up on the list then is Playground Games, Fable. Their take on Fable. I don't like Fable, but I do like the look of this. I did not like the originals, but I'm extremely intrigued by this because one, I love Playground Games. I love what they've done with Forza Horizon, and two, technically speaking, this looks fantastic. They're doing some great stuff with the visual design here. And three, I'm just, it may as well be, this is a complete reboot. I liked the concept of Fable, but I didn't like the way it actually played out. And part of that's probably due to Molyneux's ridiculous promises over what it would be. And then it was not that at all. Right? So, but here though, very interested to see what's going on. And I guess I kind of want to start with the tech stuff. Have we had any confirmation on what engine they're using here?
I know from behind the scenes, I've asked, it is Playground's tech.
That's because it definitely does not have that Unreal look like so many others. The lighting is definitely not that, but I'm glad to hear that it's Playground's tech. That's actually very encouraging because their stuff is awesome, but they've never done anything like this, right? They've had characters in Forza Horizon, but I wouldn't describe them as, worthy of a standalone action adventure. Per se. It would be great if there was some car cameos in this, though. I got to admit,
there's got to be a Forza Horizon joke in there somewhere. I'd hope there is actually.
Yeah. So Alex, what are your thoughts on this? What did you think of old Fable games, and what do you think about this one?
Old Fable games are I've played the original, and I've also seen bits of, I think it's the third game, because it's actually one of the original games that has TAA in it, like a ridiculously rudimentary version of TAA.
Oh, it's like super blurry as a result. Like there's so much ghosting.
And it's constantly ghosted frames.
Yeah, I remember
that. I definitely remember that. And so one, obviously, the good versus evil thing in the at least from my recollection of the original, is like the main advertising point, I almost feel, of the original Fable. And one thing when you look at these trailers that we've been seeing is I actually don't think that has been a main advertising point. The binary you are evil or you are good, and it dramatically changes your visual appearance and maybe some of the game interactions. That hasn't been here at all. What they've been instead emphasizing is like the heroic adventure, but through the lens of comedy. I think that is what they're really driving for with this game. The original games were trying to be funny in a kind of early 2000s level of humor. And this seems a bit more like there's actually punchlines. I think this is what this is about. So I'm excited for that aspect. I don't have a very fond relationship with the Fable series, but tech wise, I think one interesting thing is there's one thing we know is that their technology definitely scales. It supports ray traced reflections. It may even support more than that. But one thing they pioneered with Forza Horizon, the last one, that's five, is their Surfle based GI system. It wasn't ray traced. They could probably extend it to be ray traced if they wanted, but there's two shots in this trailer that I thought were interesting. I think it's at 132 or 131 maybe. They're walking into some sort of cathedral like looking area.
Oh yes, yeah.
With some stairs with vaulted ceilings, and the arches, and underneath that one arch, you can definitely see some light spill and some occlusion on a larger scale. It doesn't look necessarily per pixel, but that's stuff that I mean, I really hope they're not doing that by hand. That seems like a big waste of time.
Probably not.
But that's stuff that technically could have been done maybe in the other games that they've done in the past, but you don't really have like those type of locations ever showing up. Like John was saying, there's no really character locations and stuff like that. Another scene is a little bit earlier in the trailer where it's hard to get a grasp of how indirect lighting is actually working, is when the main character walks up to like the equivalent of like a potion cellar or something like that in the city. And there it's like, I got less of like a really good bounce light look, where I thought that looked like a little bit more like, oh, this is SSAO mixing with something. So it's interesting. There's different levels of fidelity there. I don't know if they have RTGI in the engine at all at this point in time, but I would kind of really love to see it for a game like this, which is presumably time of day based open world game, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that would really benefit the visuals, but the visuals still shown otherwise, regardless of what I said, were really top quality. The geometric detail, for example,
Super
I thought was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also really liked it. One thing they did really well in Forza Horizon 5 was that large scale occlusion in forests, where they would sort of simulate like the natural shadowing you get. Again, it's like a hack basically to overcome the lack of real time ray trace GI, but it was effective. But I see what you mean in the scene with the cellar, stuff in the background, the barrels, everything lined up. It's a bit glowy in spots,
and it's also like it's shifting in a way that suggests some screen space reuse. Like
Oh yeah, yep. There's almost it's like exactly. I can see that right when the camera spins around. You see that barrel sort of sheen up. The shine shifts there. I will say though, they have really nice sharp self shadows. Like in that same scene, if you look at like the collar of the person she's talking to, his coat, you can see the sword on her back. Everything's extremely well defined. So I don't think that's just like a normal shadow map there. It looks too sharp, at least from what I can tell in this video stream. It's always hard to, but yeah, that looks really good.
Here though, one thing is I imagine this is going to be a 30 FPS game. I just get that feeling.
Likely.
The feeling.
I mean, already in Forza Horizon 5, they had to make sacrifices to get to 60 FPS on console. Right? Mm-hmm. So, and that was a cross-gen experience. I think 30 for this, that's acceptable enough. And there'll be a PC version as well, I assume. So, you can go higher than that. One other thing I want to highlight was that around 111, they showed that one lady there with an extremely impressive haircut. I thought,
yes,
like it's a very full like black hair, and it's just like the way the light plays off of it, just like the density and granularity of it. That's really good. Like that's hard to get right, and it's definitely excellent.
Yeah, that does look really
good.
The
hair in general actually is good, I would say.
Yeah,
including Albion's greatest hero retired. He's got that sort of like long, stringy wrestler hair, you know. It looks pretty good.
Excuse me for not recognizing the person. Is that Super Hans from Peep Show? Who's the actor there? Have you ever seen Peep Show?
I've seen Peep Show. I can't remember who. He definitely is reminiscent of someone for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, we know that
everyone from the UK right now is screaming at me like, "How dare you not recognize Ferguson Funkelfunk?" You know, like I don't know who he is, but yeah, but that's what it gave me the vibes about.
It's probably going to be because I think they've got like Richard
Awad.
I can never say that. He was in that initial trailer that they showed off.
Oh, it is Super Hans. You're right.
Right?
Is it?
It's Matt King.
I wasn't sure.
Dude, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
And the narrator is Stephen Fry. That's great. So wow.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, actually.
So they're really leaning into all this. That's pretty great. Cool. Yeah. Fable looks cool. I'm really happy with that as well. Anything else you want to say before we move on?
I mean, I like trailers, but this is one game where I really want to just also see unedited gameplay at one point, because the old games are so old. Like if you play Fable 1, it's no way that this game plays like Fable 1 or even Fable 3 or
No,
any of the other games.
hopefully not.
It's going to have a lot more modern flavoring in it. So I'm curious what the just base gameplay looks like at this point.
Agreed. For the Lich King. All right, we should move on to the next topic then. And the next topic is another game. So this is one that's been in development for a while, and these guys have obviously had a rough time over there. It's from a Ukrainian developer. Is it GSC? Yeah, GSC. I always get that. It's like acronym, but it's Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl, right? And that's been in the works for a while. Obviously, there were delays, as you can imagine. And we actually played this last year at Gamescom, and that demo was extremely rough and felt very early. But it apparently comes out on September 5th of this year. And what they showed at this show, though, I think was extremely promising and looks far more polished and further along. I mean, obviously it's a curated trailer, right? But they showed a lot of cool stuff and a good amount of variety of things that we can expect from here, including some really nice first-person animations.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Alex, I think especially for you're a big fan of the original Stalker games, if I recall.
Yeah,
So,
at least the first one. I actually
haven't.
I haven't actually beaten the
Clear Sky
third game.
and,
I beat Clear Sky, which
Clear
is shorter,
Sky.
but I haven't beaten. I forget the name of. Was it
Something of Chernobyl? I don't know.
No, the
that's
second one's
Shadow of
is
Chernobyl.
Shadow
That's
of-
the original.
Call of Pripyat. I
Call
believe
of
is the name
Pripyat. That's what it is. Yes,
is the name of the third one,
Yes.
which I haven't played, by the way. So, but I've played Clear Sky and the OG. And here, actually, that's one thing is I do have some really good memory of the original game. And the one thing that I want to call out in the trailer here is actually a lot of things that we didn't see in previous released media footage from this game was the more mundane aspects of
yes.
Playing a Stalker, the original game, and also a little bit of the environment / enemy interactions, which is kind of what makes the first game unique. It's the variety of enemy types with their own behaviors, and then the anomalies. And you get actually a lot of that in this trailer, which we haven't seen before, even including very stark audio callbacks as being literally the exact same samples from, I think, probably from the original game. Correct me if I'm wrong there. At least that's what my brain thought it heard. And including also weapon types from the original game. The original game, it takes place in this specific area with a lot of like Soviet equipment and things like that, but also had like things because like the zone attracts people from like different places of the world, not just people from that live in this area. And I think that's like where there's like the weird equipment you can find. And I think that was shown off better in this trailer as well too. I did like that they showed off like the congregation area, like the place where you can like buy and sell and trade equipment, etc., or get missions and things. Something that was also kind of lacking from the original trailers we've seen. Like they've shown off a lot of the thing that the first game didn't do at all was have like good cinematics, right? Mm-hmm. But here, obviously, they have the tech, the skill set, and the time and budget apparently to be doing that much better, and that's shown off really well in the trailer too. Here too, but I was just really happy to see more uninterrupted gameplay, the larger scale. The verticality was really nice, especially when they show the character climbing what might be a water tower or to the top of some building and overlooking into the streets below. That's something that is definitely, you'd got to show in a Stalker game. So I was really excited for this. This is going to be UE5.
Yep.
Trailer, I don't know. It was hard. You can see Lumen in action throughout the entire thing. But with regard to reflection type, that's where Oliver and I especially wanted to say, like, is this Lumen hardware or is this Lumen software? And we would want hardware just for future scalability and perhaps even performance on some level. And here, based on the trailer, I really couldn't tell. But it was a very sharp trailer. Like, this might have been native 4K almost, it almost looked like. Didn't look like upscaling, which I thought was very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I would say the game is now at a point where they release what I always call like the realistic trailer. And by that, I mean the game is so close to release that everything in the trailer footage is now representative, very likely, of what you will get in the final product. And you know, that's when you start to see some of the more fancy pre-rendered stuff fade away from any trailers. And it's just like, this is the game. This is what it's going to look like. And I do feel like it has a very sharp, clean look. They did not, they seem to have avoided motion blur pretty much by and large, which is a little bit of a shame, but it's super sharp and crisp. My only visual complaint based on this here really is the character models. Like they're not bad or anything, but, and that tends to be one of the more expensive things to do, right? But like here in this scene where they're sort of gathered around, they kind of have that shiny
metahuman look.
I would say not quite metahuman look. I mean, maybe if they are metahuman models, but the way that they are lit in the environment has that very high contrast, normal mappy look in the trailer.
I get what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think actually if you zoom in and look closely at those models, they're probably insanely detailed, but the way they present in the game, it's not as convincing. But the lighting, though, like you say, using Lumen GI here makes a huge impact because this is a world bathed in natural indirect lighting or sunlight. And they do a lot of those scenes where it's sort of like the light streaming into the room, into the area, and that looks cool. There's also that moment at 22 minutes 17 seconds where they show some basically like an anomaly storm or something, sort of a large whirlwind in the background, which is a fun visual effect that they've got there. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this turns out. It's when we first saw footage of this all those years ago, it looked somehow more impressive, but I just went back and looked at the other trailer while we were talking, and it pretty much looks about the same in many ways, which makes me think that it's just our expectations have kind of increased as we've seen what this stuff is capable of, right? And I still think it's a gorgeous game for sure, though. And I don't know, what do you think that was running on? That's probably PC, I'd imagine.
So the one thing that we should probably talk about is this entire showcase is, I'm going to contend they named it Xbox Showcase, but it's the PC Showcase, actually, in terms of just practicality of it all. When they do say it's gameplay, every trailer that we saw, excluding some weird uploads after the fact, was 4K. A lot of them were 60 and flawless. And the gameplay, the game types shown, like RTS games, flight sim, I almost feel like, and we can talk about the hardware thing after this, but I almost feel like this is actually a very much so geared towards PC presentation. And I think that's reflected in the footage as well too, where I'm pretty sure everything was recorded on PC. They did, at least for this showcase, more often describe something as being mixed cinematics with gameplay footage. They did actually use that phrase on the bottom, or just pure gameplay. Like I think for the Perfect Dark one, it was just like gameplay. But I think this is all PC footage. I don't think we've seen anything Series X here at all, actually.
I think you're probably right. I was just looking at the scene where it's 1 minute and 23 seconds. Trying to examine the reflections there, and they're not really lining up with objects there. It's really hard to tell this stuff just from trailers. We'll find out when the game ships, because we don't have to wait that long. It's almost out.
This is the one thing I'm also worried about. This Xbox Showcase reminded me, and I was looking at all the release dates, like end of August,
we're screwed,
up
dude.
until October is ridiculously jam-packed. Every week is like 2 or 3 games that I could potentially cover.
And I'm out for 2 weeks during September.
Like I'm going to prioritize Stalker 2 for myself here, and everyone can you can grab whatever you want. But I'm going to want to cover the PC version of Stalker 2, hopefully getting a good deal before launch. I wouldn't promise that to anyone, but I would like that just so I can cover it in good detail and do justice to a game that I'm very interested in.
I feel like this is going to be a very PC centric game, and probably this deserves the full treatment, I think, similar to your excellent Metro Exodus video from back in the day.
Right. I would like to do that. Yeah.
That would be wonderful to see. So who's going to step up for our next game on the list? Another one we're going to talk about here, and they spent a lot of time on this. It's Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Wow, Black Ops 6. We've come a long way, gents.
Wow.
They actually opened the show with this, and then went on to do more of a quote unquote deep dive, where it's one of those things where they just go to the studio and the guys just say, we've done this and this before, but this time we're doing this thing that you love. It's going to be the best ever. This is the most responsive Call of Duty. This is the most Call of Duty ever. You know, that kind of stuff, right? That's fine. That's all part and fun. And the actual gameplay trailer, all the footage they've shown, it looks, as you'd expect, quite good. I would say the engine is in a good place. This is Treyarch again, so I guess the last one they did was the Cold War entry, which was a very handsome game and a launch title for PS5 and Xbox Series X. Wait, was it launch or near launch? It was actually launch, yeah. And that one, that had ray traced shadows. It also had a 120
and
hertz.
RTAO.
It did. That's right.
On PC.
It was Modern Warfare before that had RT shadows only. Did that have AO on PC?
No,
it was just the shadows.
Although their tech supported it, I'm pretty sure we heard behind the scenes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that. But Cold War was pretty impressive actually at the time, and it was a good showcase for what the consoles could offer, I would say. And, you know, better on PC even, of course. But hey, it does look visually good. It's a continuation, obviously, of what these guys have done before over at Treyarch. It seems to be taking place during the Gulf War era this time. It still looks comparable to prior entries, so it's not like they're doing anything crazy new here, but it's just fancy. Everything's clean, sharp. It still has that crisp Call of Duty look to the image quality. Everything moving along at a smooth frame rate. I hope they retain the 120 hertz support mode that they had in Cold War. I think on the console at least. Obviously, PC will get that and more. That would be excellent. I don't know.
Yeah.
What else sticks out to you guys about this? I don't think any of us are like huge COD players, to be honest. But
no, I play the campaigns usually, which I think is the same boat that that John is in. But I don't know. It seems like since Modern Warfare 2019, it seems like we're kind of a kin in terms of the overall look of the games. Now they've improved since then, but 2019 was a big improvement, especially in terms of like the first-person animations, like the snappiness and the way everything looks and the way the gun is moving is just such a big improvement over other similar titles, I think. And it looks great here. It looks fantastic here. Actually, they're doing more with like cornering the gun in certain ways, and it looks very compelling, I think, the first-person animation. The only thing that really stands out to me, tech-wise, are two things. The first thing is that there are some screen space artifacts in the reflections. Pretty obvious.
Unsurprising.
Just one thing to look for, but yeah, just very obviously SSR, super obvious. The other thing, though, more interesting, is that the shadows look very consistent in some areas, very sharp, some areas resolving very fine detail, like goggles on a character's face, shadows underneath, very sharp on the gun model as well, and very diffuse in some instances when you're looking at interior lights. So that, to me, looks a whole lot like potentially ray trace shadows, which we also saw in Cold War. But, you know, I mean, subsequently, we haven't really seen too much of that now, have we? So this is, certainly interesting.
One thing that's good news about that then is that it does potentially suggest that we could still see that 120 FPS mode, because that was the thing that they would disable in 120 is the ray traced shadows, right? So if they still have the budget to do the ray traced shadows at 60 FPS on consoles, then presumably they could still pull off a 120 mode as well. But again, we don't know what this was captured on. It was I mean, just in terms of like ease of production, it's probably PC anyway.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it could be PC and representative of console, but we just don't know.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, realistically, unless a trailer explicitly says this is running on this specific hardware, we can usually assume PC just in terms of asset production for whoever's making the trailer, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to get all the types of fancy shots you want when you're just doing it on a PC because you have full control over that stuff. So,
yeah. The one thing, so I made a tweet while I was watching this. The reason why I was curious about what the reflections were being done, rewatching again, there's a lot of screen space artifacting. But there's a shot at what is roughly 41 or 42 seconds where it shows a character and they've got glasses on, or maybe it's goggles actually, and you can see the flames reflected in them. They're obviously completely off screen. And I don't know if the Call of Duty games have ever used like planar reflections of any sort, or real-time cube maps or anything like that. So I'm curious to see what that is in the final product, if it is even in the final product, because, you know, a lot of this is like spliced footage with archival footage, because that's the whole Black Ops thing. So I'm curious to see like what that looks like in game. They
could fake
this
that.
Is a cross-gen. Yeah, they could fake it a bit, but, you know, usually I don't know how you fake it. But in this case, it is a cross-gen game too. I'm curious to see when Call of Duty will finally make the jump to being current gen only.
5 years.
And I presume this is Treyarch's tech too, right? So it's not the IW tech. And one thing that I kind of liked about Treyarch is IW, after Modern Warfare 2019, they just stopped doing ray tracing.
Yeah, they did.
Whereas, you know, with the Black Ops team at Treyarch, they did do ray tracing. They added an RTAO and they did presentations on it, and they seemed like they were actually comfortable with that technology and still using it for their titles after the fact. I'm curious if they've iterated on it beyond what we saw back then. Maybe there's something else in here that we just can't see. So I'd be curious about that.
I actually think that they've homogenized the engine for this entry. They've brought them all together. They're homogenized. That's what that advertising is.
They confirmed that?
I believe so.
Well, if that is the case, and I wouldn't doubt Oliver there, that's a little bit sad. I mean, just because they ended up producing very similar looking games, which was kind of impressive that they looked almost like they were on the same technology at the end of the day. But having two tech teams doing two different things, I always thought maybe led to at least different solutions for similar problems. And that's always good for the industry, I would say, at that point, where you have, they both have games where it's like static time of day, but you can come up with a different solution to do that. And I think that would be a bit sad if everything was just IW now, but we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. We'll talk a lot more about Call of Duty in the future, no doubt, because that's what you do. No, it's an impressive tech showcase, so in many ways, and I look forward to covering it. But I'm actually a lot more excited about our next game. And our next game is Indiana Jones and the Xbox 360, also known as The Great Circle. It is the return of machine games, first person in Indiana Jones. We've seen this before. This trailer was interesting, I think, because it kind of showed more of machine games sort of flair for these kind of tense dialogue sequences. Like this, it's not quite on the level of Milkshake Nazi, but it's a pretty cool little scene, I think. That kind of shows off what they're going for. And I got to say, throughout it, I was initially skeptical of Troy Baker playing as Indiana Jones, but he actually does kind of sound like younger Harrison Ford in the original Indiana Jones film, more so than he did in Dial of Destiny when they did the flashback sequences at the beginning, where his voice felt not quite right for the younger looking Indiana Jones. You know what I mean? It was like, it was odd. And this actually does feel suitably old school. I will say though, this is a nice looking game, but it's not one necessarily pushing like crazy tech or anything, which personally I'm okay with. I think it's going to be smooth, and I think it's visually attractive, even if it's not amazing. They're not doing anything like that we've not seen, or that's okay. It's completely okay. But I'm pretty stoked for this. I don't know what do you guys think, Alex? I mean, You're also excited about this, I believe. Also a Machine Games fan.
Yeah, I mean, I also just want to see Indiana Jones doing things. The one thing I noticed with the trailer that I really liked is that this time you got some more of the classic Indiana Jones punch sound, which is iconic. And also, if you've ever heard like gunshots in an Indiana Jones film, especially from like a revolver, they're like stupidly punchy. like levels of ridiculousness about how punchy they are. And I think I heard that a couple times. Like the gunshot audio sounded really, really great. At least for the first person shooting segments. I can't really comment about the cutscene audio. But that was all great. One thing though, like I just said with Fable, I would actually like to see uninterrupted gameplay, but maybe that's just not fit for what this type of showcase was, because they did after the fact dedicate a lot to blops. So maybe there wasn't the time for that, but I did like at least that we got to see a longer form cinematic there, showing off, something. I think the scenario is actually very interesting. Like Crisis, like the boat in the ice. It's like, how did it get up there?
While I was watching it, I was like, looks like someone had a little trouble parking their boat.
My feelings exactly. And actually, if I were to guess, so like the cinematic ends with like presumably the boat falling down the mountain. Mm-hmm. I almost could imagine a set piece level where you are doing combat while a boat is falling down a mountain, which would probably look hilarious.
That would be excellent.
So that's that's what I kind of got of it, because Indiana Jones, like, I don't want to talk about the fourth film, but there's a lot of moments where like you're on a moving object, and not you, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones is on a moving object and punching and shooting people. In fact, that happens almost in every film, I think. It's a conveyor belt, it's a tank, it's a car. That's
something Naughty Dog also really utilized for Uncharted games, I'd say.
Yeah. So in that case, I imagine we're going to see that in the game, but also based upon the other stuff that they've shown in the past, it does seem like there's going to be like slightly more wider level design in areas where you're just stealthing around and sleuthing. So,
dude, I got to say that right before that boat sequence, right at it's about 1:17 or so, or 1:20, they walk into the deck of the ship there, and there's the frozen Nazi on the ground holding, I guess, the stone that they're looking for. But when they first walk in and see it, I swear it looks like he's clutching his phone.
That's why it's like totally a guy in the corner going.
He's like, oh god, you gotta get this last text out before I freeze to death. That was comical.
I think with this game, it does look quite good overall, but maybe this trailer isn't showing it off at its best, because in these more narrative type sequences, you do see the faces a lot more and you see the facial animation a lot more. And it's just not quite at the same level, I think, as maybe like a Naughty Dog style, Uncharted 4 style presentation.
Yeah, it's not even at that level, I'd say.
Yeah, where it does look a bit more natural and you're getting the really nice performances. You're getting that across. Here, it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect. It's not quite there. So I think the gameplay, like the shooting gameplay, the whipping gameplay, that all looks good. Here with the character performances, I'm like, it's just falling a little bit short of kind of like that super polished, like AAA narrative focused ideal. It still looks good, but it's just a little short of that in my personal opinion.
Yeah,
but it mostly looks quite good.
I agree, but I also want to stress that I think that's ultimately not that important in the end, because that's the kind of thing we've kind of somewhat asked for, I guess. It's like more, I don't know what the budget on this is, but more sustainable game creation in the AAA space.
Yeah, that's true.
This is the kind of stuff that gets really, really expensive and bogs down development a lot, right? Like when Naughty Dog started setting that bar, a lot of other companies tried to meet them there, and now we've seen a rise of that stuff. And it is admittedly very cool looking, and it's very impressive when done well, but is it always worth it? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
It's very expensive.
It's like that scene. It's like that scene in Uncharted 4 where Nathan Drake's nose is bending, or the scene in The Last of Us Part 2 where Ellie is taking off her shirt. And these are scenes that took like weeks to, a long time.
There's like insane stuff in there where you're like, okay, that's it's a very quick scene, but you know that what they're doing is expensive and time consuming.
Yeah.
And I think for this, to me, this looks very game-like in a way that works for me. I think I'm totally fine with this aesthetic. It's still appealing. It's very likely still id Tech. If I had to wager, it's probably not using the latest iteration as we see in Doom, the Dark Ages necessarily, but I'm sure there's been improvements, changes since Eternal, and they've had to do adaptations to their own workflow and what they're trying to do with this game, which is obviously different from Doom. But also, it looks like the cutscenes themselves, we were just talking about them, they are at least presented at 60 FPS and seem to be real-time in the engine. If I recall, the last Wolfenstein games mostly relied on pre-rendered scenes. Like, they would pop up videos for any major scene. It was just a video.
Yeah, and it was 30 FPS always, so it was jarring.
Exactly.
They had some like random cutscenes that were real time. For example, in
that's right.
What's the name of the sequel with his girls? I forget the name.
Oh,
Youngblood.
Yeah.
Right? The Youngblood. That one had, at least the opening cutscene is real time, but it's like a 30 FPS cap. And it's kind of awkward.
That's nasty. Yep.
Yeah, especially, like on PC, it's just like, why is this capped at 30? Yeah, I hope this means kind of like Riddick and other games that these people have a pedigree on, that's like real-time cutscenes finally. Because, that stuff scales really well. 10 years down the line, you can load up the game at 16K, on your RTX 70,000 or whatever it's going to be called by then.
And for what it's worth, given the pedigree of machine games and id tech, I'm sure this is going to be a pretty solid performer on the consoles. It's going to run pretty well and look good, and it's going to be a solid technical experience, I think.
Okay, well, I think we're all excited for that one. Can't wait to check it out later this year. Let's move on. All right, we've been going for a while now. It's been about an hour and a half by my watch, talking about these games, and there's a lot of other cool stuff in there, and let's just kind of briefly just touch on it, but we're just to do a little summary. For instance, Mixtape, that was one of the favorite things for me that they showed there. It really is, it's a play for nostalgia, right? But the presentation of that and some of the concepts that they were showing in that, I thought really were appealing. Like, obviously it's the mix of music in there is really cool. And this tagline of, the best memories are made in music that really rings true for me in a weird way, where like I can pinpoint myself and throughout life thinking back to music. And that's kind of what they're doing here. There's skateboarding, platforming, adventure-y stuff. It's a weird mix, but it's like a stop motion-y kind of animation, which this is the only game to do that. I thought it looked freaking awesome, and the theme is extremely appealing to me. So there was Expedition 33. Alex, what did you think of that? Because it's an FRPG, a French RPG.
Genuinely shocked that it is turn-based, it looks like. Genuinely shocked.
Right.
Like, a Western, extremely expensive looking presentation being a turn-based game.
Haven't had that since Anachronox.
Sure. And in this case, it's like, that shocked me. I also liked the visual styling. It seems to be some sort of many worlds, or I don't know exactly what the storyline is, but it is going for something that did not look, for example, I'm sorry to pick on this game, but like they showed off Dragon Age, and like to me, like there was just like, there's RPGs, not every RPG has to be the same, but like the visual styling of Dragon Age to me just looked like extremely modern, generic. And this year I was actually very intrigued by the visual stylings that I saw, because it was, like showing things that you don't tend to see too often in video games. So that got me really excited from the visuals and obviously from the gameplay perspective, because it's kind of daring to say, no, sit down, wait for your turn to be done.
I love turn-based.
It's not as flashy. It's not nearly as flashy. So, yeah.
Oh, pardon me, it's Clair Obscur Expedition 33. So it's a very tricky little name there, I would say, but
yeah, for sure.
It looks awesome. Next, though, on the list, Oliver, what did you think of South of Midnight?
Oh, I thought it looked pretty good. It has that same kind of like staccato animation style, animation every 3, 4, 5 frames, just like we saw with Mixtape. I was impressed here. They showed off a good amount of gameplay, which we didn't actually see a whole lot of from this showcase. That's my one criticism of it. They're doing something interesting with the animation during gameplay where they kind of are going halfway, so they aren't going all the way in the direction of maintaining their stylistic flourishes, but they aren't going all the way in terms of ditching it, sort of like Hi-Fi Rush did. They're kind of like animating on twos, but updating the character position every frame. That's kind of how it's going there, which I think is an interesting compromise. I think it looks okay. It looks better than I think we saw a little bit in Mixtape, where they're rotating the camera at the same time as keeping the characters on this very staccato movement, which is a little disorienting to me personally. But I was impressed with this gameplay. I think it looks really iconic, really interesting. I don't know what tech they're using. Unreal Engine would probably be a safe bet these days, but looks really cool.
Yeah, that's a hot one, definitely. Quickly mention Atomfall, which is kind of the first new thing I've seen from Rebellion for a while. That's not about sniping or zombies. Well, maybe there's some zombies in there, actually.
Could be some
zombie-like things going on in there. They added TAA, it looks like, which was something that their prior games really didn't have. They had a very overly sharp look, perhaps. But this looks like a significant visual upgrade from a lot of their previous games as well, I would say.
Mm-hmm. On some levels for sure.
Nothing like pushed. No boundaries are being pushed here. Let's be clear, but it's handsome.
And Oliver did, right before we started talking, did mention that's his 2025 title with cross-gen. So,
oh my god, that's right.
5 years into the current generation. I don't know. That seems really intense. We'll see what that means at the end. But it's good to see them doing something that isn't the Sniper Elite series. Seriously, I'm happy to see them doing something else. And it was also first person, which Sniper Elite isn't unless you scope in. So I like that. Good. We'll cover that, I hope. Yep. Dragon Age was... I thought this looked... I'm so sorry. I thought this was really unappealing. When they changed the name, I was like, that sounds very different. And then the logo was like this purple now. Yeah. The text is like purple. And we just had Concord last week. To me, this looked like single player Concord in terms of the notes it was trying to hit in the trailer. Yes. You have to be really into this humor and this presentation style of just like the way you show off things.
Mm-hmm. Joss Whedon-ified.
Wow. It did not hit for me at all. Incredible.
Well, apparently this might have been born from the ashes of a Dragon Age project that was a cooperative multiplayer game. So I think you might see that a little bit here. I think it looks, technically at least, it looks quite good. But again, this is Frostbite. I don't know exactly what the provenance of this is, so it's hard to say. I want to see some gameplay. I'm enjoying that word today.
Stylistically, it kind of reminded me of Dragon Age 2, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
But that game is awful looking, I think. Sorry.
Ouch. Speaking of awful, State of Decay 3 was also shown, and it looked fine in the trailer. I don't understand those games. Like, do either of you guys play State of Decay? Like,
I might have played it 10 minutes maybe once. It looks a lot better than the other State of Decay games. I'll give them that.
I was going to say the other ones were genuinely like ugly games.
Yeah.
This one, provided what's in this trailer is representative of the type of visuals they're going for, then I'd say it actually is a good looking game now, which is cool.
Very good looking in that case.
Yeah.
Quite.
But once again, a lot of cinematic there, so hard to get a read on. I mean, the other games are like kind of like survival base building mechanics. Mm-hmm. So, right, if I'm not mistaken.
Not to knock this, by the way. I think I see why people have a lot of fun with these, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just our tastes. It's not commenting on the quality of the game.
No. I would say shout out to Age of Mythology Retold. Age of Mythology is largely forgotten and very bright, clean art style in that original game. 3D graphics was rare for the time. And here, very similar approach to visuals. We didn't see actually like the UI. I'm very curious. I don't think we saw the UI. I'm very curious to see what that looks like because
it's on consoles, right?
It's also on consoles.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be day and date on Xbox.
Yeah.
And they still have yet. I think they can still show off more Eastern mythologies. Here they focused on, like the primary African and Mediterranean cultures and the Norse too as well. And I'm just curious to see if they actually, with DLCs down the road or expansions, whether they go east. So I would actually like to see subcontinent stuff or, something else. But that looked fantastic, I thought.
Heck yeah. And honestly, there's a lot more stuff there that we didn't talk about. Not all of it necessarily appealing to us. Like, don't care. Fallout 76. Like, that's a good game. They've turned it around. There's some cool stuff for Sea of Thieves coming. That's nice. Mecha Break looked kind of cool. There's good stuff there. Assassin's Creed we'll probably talk about with Ubisoft. Flight Sim, always gorgeous. Wu Chang looked nice. Like, there's a ton of stuff that was showed. It was a gigantic show. Very impressive showing overall. One other thing they revealed, though, is the existence of new Xbox hardware. The trash can seems to be dead, and instead we have 3 new variants of the current console lineup. So there is the Deluxe Edition, a special edition of the Xbox Series X for $599, which is a proper normal Series X with the disc drive and like a starry like finish with like green highlights. It's interesting, but I think it is limited. They also introduced the Series X digital, which is kind of, I guess, parody with the PS5 digital, in that it is just that hardware, but there's no disc drive, and it's white. And I like the white. I wish there was a way to get that for the disc drive model, to be honest, but unfortunately. There's also a white 1 terabyte Series S revealed. So as far as we can tell from the wording on their site anyway, it seems like these are just additive, as in the fear with that adorably all digital pitch was that they would replace the original Series X completely. So like the disc drive is gone. That does not necessarily seem to be the case. They at least seem to be still offering the regular Xbox Series X that we already have, that one back there, and the 500 gigabyte Series S. These are just additional options into their tree. And, it not really for me. I don't know. What do you guys think? But I can see why.
Yeah.
I think they really missed a trick here, though. Like, if they could have, not that I'm not into the all digital stuff, mind you, but like if they could have at least put the Xbox Series X at $399 with the all digital model, I feel like that would have been a big play. The problem there, though, is that the official price, I think, on the PS5 digital is $449.
Yeah.
Just like this, right? But you can regularly get it cheaper. It's on sale right now. Furthermore, the regular Xbox Series X with the disc drive is constantly available for $399. It's not hard to get that for less money than what this all digital Series X is going to go for. So that makes me wonder, are those deals just going to dry up? Like, it almost seems like it's going to affect the overall availability. And I don't think these move the needle in any way. Like, clearly console sales is not where Microsoft is focusing right now. They are becoming a gigantic publisher. But I still feel like there's something here that they could have done to help further drive sales, maybe. Oliver, what do you think?
I think this is basically fine, to me at least. There's no real indication this is replacing the disc version of the console.
Yep.
Unlike the adorably all digital, which is like came with quotes like, "I don't even miss my physical games. This is fantastic." And they actually,
who was that?
Stupid. Probably ChatGPT generated. And they are actually launching a new disc drive equipped console as well. So that indicates some, future for, even though it is a limited edition, it looks cool. I think that indicates some future for, hardware SKUs that have the disc drive. It's not as elegant though as the solution on PlayStation with the detachable drive. And I think ultimately it is clear that Microsoft would really rather you buy games digitally, especially with the declining store
Game Pass
space.
They want subs.
Exactly. They want Game Pass subs, or they want you to buy the game digitally. But I think overall this is, it's not taking away anyone's choices, and this could be a good option for some players. I just think it's sort of weird they killed off the trash can. I kind of like the trash can, sort of. I thought it was interesting looking. But, absent the trash can, I think this is fine. This is a better direction for their business, I think, to continue to support more hardware SKUs for the Xbox line.
thinking of dremeling out a disk drive slot and a button slot there on the white one, and see if we can just like swap the case around.
That'd be funny. Is it cooler because there's now more airspace in it? Like,
yes.
I'm very
actually.
So
actually, that's an interesting point, Alex.
They overclock the GPU.
Yes, do it. For me, I actually am curious about the technicalities of this. So from the Adorably All Digital, we knew it was a die shrink, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So they set that up at some point. Is this a die shrink? We'll see. Maybe Rich is going to have to pry it open and look. But usually you would expect maybe some form factor change from that, which is why I thought, like you were saying, all digital future for console. Yeah. But at least the trash can was doing something with the form factor, presumably as a result of technical changes.
Yeah.
And here, this is the exact, it looks like the exact, maybe it's like, I don't know, is it a little bit shorter or something?
I don't think
so. I think it looks like the same chassis to me. So
it probably is.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And yeah, I feel like it really shows the direction of Microsoft's going in. Instead, they don't want to commit to the hardware. This is like a very, very minor bump. To like maybe some newcomers, but they're going to keep the old ones around.
Yep.
Yeah.
More SKUs, which is more of an NVIDIA strategy, I feel like, from the PC space. And it just, to me, it shows actually a lack of dedicated like concern for their hardware on console. I actually feel like it's pointing more to the direction of them leaving this space. In the traditional model.
I feel like they're probably winding up for whatever they have coming next, the rumored handheld stuff, whatever they want to do next. Like, I think they've accepted that in terms of console sales, this gen is not doing it, right? And I don't think it makes sense for them to invest that money into a cross-gen like a mid-gen refresh update, like we're seeing with the PS5 Pro, which hasn't been announced, by the way, but we know is definitely a thing. And I think it's probably smart of them to not spend that R&D money on such a product, because I don't think it would actually move the needle. They need to focus on other things to get where they want to go.
I think if they do update to 6 nanometers, I think they'll do it in much the same way Sony did, which was without any fanfare, without any big redesign. It'll just be a 6 nanometer chip in the box and a slightly smaller heat sink, and they'll call it a day. I think that's what they'll do.
Wow.
And we'll just learn about it through in Australia, someone unboxed their or their Series X and took it apart and look what it has. Yeah.
But that also kind of ties into the last topic of the show today, which was Phil Spencer did that interview with IGN with Ryan McCaffrey, and there was the quote that came out: "You are going to see more of our games on more platforms, and we just see that as a benefit to the franchises that we're building," which I saw some people negatively reacting to it, but I think it's actually just a very blunt statement that puts forward kind of what has already been known, expected at this point. And it's just, they are indeed, I think, looking to become the world's biggest games publisher, or one of them. They are trying to become that giant, and you don't become that giant by only releasing your games on the least successful of the 3 current console platforms. They are targeting everything, I think, and it makes sense. I think there will still be exclusives for Xbox. I think they do want to keep fans there happy, but clearly their focus is on making games that they can sell to consumers on any platform. This is, and really, it just feels like a continuation. I know it goes against what the console wars have kind of always focused on, but this is a continuation of what they were doing with the PC to begin with, I think, where it's like, just get the game in more places. It was on PC, it was on the streaming, they got the subscription services. Now you can play it on these other consoles as well. Like if they'd love people subscribing to Game Pass and playing on their Xbox, but I'm sure they'd also be very happy if a PlayStation person goes out and buys a $70 copy of one of their games, right? There's still money to be earned there. And I don't blame them for going in on that at this point. And I think with the costs of development, I think Nintendo is a company that has these types of costs very well under control, and I don't think they actually need to go multi-platform anytime soon. But I think even Sony is starting to feel the heat. I don't think they necessarily need to release on Xbox, because it probably wouldn't move the needle much for them there, given the console sales. But getting on PC, they're putting the Horizon Lego game on Switch. I think we're just going to see more and more of these types of decisions coming forward. PC obviously being a central pillar of any strategy from them, I would say. So it's just, this is just the cost of games becoming this expensive and requiring this much time to make. It's not like it used to be. Like in the PS2 era, which was that perfect balance where games were coming out often enough. They were being done in like 12, 18 months. And then, you move on to the next one. There was no like after game support, and the budgets were still reasonable enough that you could just sell on the one platform and be fine. I just don't think that's that viable anymore. And Xbox knows it. This is the kind of strategy they need to take. So what do you guys think? I mean, Alex, you're shaking your head, I think, in agreement, but maybe not.
I have 100% in agreement. I also think the hardware being so similar nowadays, everything based upon just what the PC is doing. Like, why wouldn't you release it where there's potential customers you wouldn't have captured otherwise? I feel like that is a really big thing, and it's just going to keep getting most likely closer together to a certain degree there. So yeah, I think it also makes tons of sense. And for the games that haven't been announced yet as coming to PlayStation 5 from the Xbox side of things, we don't obviously have Fable there. We don't have Starfield there. There's other games that were announced too, Perfect Dark. I'm curious because with like Call of Duty and Doom, they already had established games. That franchise was already on that box. I'm curious to see what they do then with new or long dormant IPs. I'm curious to see what happens with Perfect Dark. Curious to see what with Starfield over time, and Indiana Jones too is another one where it's technically like a new type of game from the studio. Do they want to preserve this exclusivity status? Is it worth it? Indiana Jones is so recognizable.
Would Lucasfilm be okay with it?
I don't know what they're
I guess technically they might, depending on the sales. Like, obviously Marvel has that agreement for Spider-Man with Sony, right? So like,
right, exactly.
But it's still a smaller addressable base if it's just Xbox and PC. So I could see them wanting that PlayStation market.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious to what the future brings, but I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically fine with it. There was an interesting little quote from Phil Spencer where he basically said to our, Xbox customers, you're going to be able to buy or subscribe to the games of your choice, and they'll also be on other platforms. That's basically the essence of what he'd said in an IGN interview, I believe. And that quote doesn't include a carve-out for timed exclusivity, which is sort of what we've been getting so far. We presume that many of these games will come to other platforms, but they'll come to Xbox first. Maybe that will change at some point in the future. Who knows? I'm not really too opposed to it either way. I think it's a little bit unfortunate if Xbox is an exclusive hardware platform is no longer the case, just because I like exclusives. I think exclusives are fun. But at the same time, I mean, I'm in a privileged position where I basically own everything and I'll play anything on anywhere, that I want to. I understand the appeal and the obvious utility of the titles existing on PlayStation as well.
And I think the point Alex made about the hardware being so comparable at this point really shifts the needle. Like, if you go back, I use that PS2 example. If you were an Xbox studio really taking advantage of what the Xbox could do, porting that game to a PS2 wouldn't have been easy, right? Like, there's things you just cannot do on that hardware that the Xbox could do. So there was actually like a competitive advantage to shipping on specific platforms because it meant you could leverage key features. It's really not the case anymore. I mean, Xbox Series X and PS5 they may as well be the same piece of hardware. Like, there are some differences, but there's so minor. It's basically the same. So like, it's a completely different ball game in terms of like the cost of porting and actually getting it running on that other hardware, not like it was before. Right. So again, that all kind of makes sense. I really don't think Xbox is going away anytime soon as a hardware platform. I do think that they've expressed their plans. I do think we will see something with the handheld going forward, and I think if they do what we think they might do right, they could open up the market and sort of approach it from a different angle than what Sony and Nintendo can do. And they might be able to find an audience there. Because I think just right now they've traditionally tried to play by the same rules as Sony and Nintendo but it's a different company, Microsoft is, so they actually can leverage things like Windows to do some unique stuff, I think, in terms of how they build out their next platform. And hey, isn't that what Bill wanted back in the day when they first pitched Xbox? Like, it should just run Windows, and maybe we'll get an Xbox port of Microsoft Office.
Yeah, a direct Xbox.
That'd be sick.
Oh, direct Xbox.
Just name the next one direct Xbox.
Yeah, just
do it, Phil.
Go all the way. But I think that's pretty much it. We're not doing questions for this one because it is sort of a one-off special thing. But if you had to give this a scale, a grade on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, what would you rate this overall show as? I'll go first. I'm going to give it a 9.
Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say 9 as well, too. I would like to see more gameplay.
Yes.
As always, uninterrupted. But in terms of just gameplay types I like, give me your first-person games. I like games in first-person so much. And your RTSs, give me them. All of them. Yeah.
I'd probably also say a 9, just because this was just an outrageous amount of upcoming games that all look really high quality. My only caveat here is that I would have loved to have seen a little bit more in terms of breadth of gameplay shown.
That's fair.
But I would caveat that with early this week we are getting apparently some gameplay reveals of Metal Gear Solid and Avowed. So that is potentially interesting as a kind of an addendum to this event. I really do like the format of the developer directs, and I understand that format probably would not work for these June showcases. But I'd love to see another one of those maybe towards the end of the year or something, just to give us a little bit more meat to some of these titles.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's fair to say, at least from my perspective, this is probably the best show Microsoft's put on in like well over a decade.
Yeah,
like, their shows have notoriously been disappointing in the last few years, where they hype them up, everybody's excited, and you always walk away being like, yeah, it was a pretty good show, but not. It's always missing something. It felt like this one really, by and large, really hit it on the head. I mean, yeah, I would have liked to have seen more gameplay, especially something from Gears, but this kind of feels like there's a hint of that older Microsoft, the older pre-Xbox One Microsoft here, with some of the confidence at which they were showing things, which is kind of cool to see. And this was, I would say, significantly more exciting and interesting than what we saw from the PlayStation thing recently.
Oh yeah.
Aside from Astrobot, which is top tier, but everything else, it's like, it was fine, but not that super exciting, I would say. This one was really, really good. So congrats to Microsoft on turning it around this year. They've had a pretty rough year, I think, in many ways, at least on the PR front. So it was nice to see a really great selection of software out there and finally showing games that people have been waiting for, especially something like Perfect Dark, which I really genuinely did not expect to see shown off at all anytime soon, given what we've heard. So that's great. But I think that's going to do it for this. Thank you guys for joining me early for this recording.
Ooh.
It was tough.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
We're alive. There's more coming.
Yeah, Ubisoft breakouts. Oh my goodness,
it does feel a bit E3 like, which is fun, but we'll have a lot more to say throughout this week, including, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time.